You're hanging around at home enjoying your morning coffee when you stumble across a news article with a disturbing title. You open up the article, maybe even read through it, but ultimately close the tab, hoping that whoever was responsible would be caught. But what really are the odds that your local police department will be able to investigate and lead to the conviction of the right person? Well, it turns out that at least in the States, the likelihood is the same as flipping a coin. In 2020, the crime clearance rate for homicides in the United States was 54%. Think about everyone out there that lost someone close to them and had the case left unsolved. Could you imagine the pain that they go through when all they're looking for is some closure? Well, today we're going to dive a little deeper into a story that left people with many questions and the events that followed that resulted in solving a 14-year-old cold case. Today's story takes us to Hiroshima, Japan. And to the people who are not from there, you may have only heard about this beautiful city from its past international conflicts. But as the years went by, they recovered from nothing to a bustling downtown area. Although the city is not as common of a tourist city compared to Tokyo and Kyoto, Hiroshima is not short of beautiful landscapes and amazing food. It's still a tourist-friendly city, and its charm can be seen from the fact that it retains the appeal of a small Japanese town. It was a warm autumn day on October 25th, 2004. People were going to and from work. Students were going to school and from school. It was just your average day in Hiroshima. But soon, it would be anything but normal. That afternoon, 17-year-old Satomi Kitaguchi, who was a second-year student at Hatsukaichi High School, was returning home from school. And as it was exam season, Satomi would be returning home earlier than usual after finishing her exam. When she arrived home, she said hello to her grandmother Michio and younger sister, and then went upstairs to her room to rest. Satomi's younger sister and grandmother were downstairs in the living room watching TV, until all of a sudden, they heard a scream coming from upstairs. They hurried upstairs to Satomi's room, and when they opened the door, they saw her lying face down in a pool of blood. Next to Satomi was a man holding a bloody knife, staring right at them. The man charged at them, chasing them both down the stairs. Satomi's sister made it all the way to a neighboring florist shop and begged for help. Unfortunately for Michio, at 72 years of age, it was difficult to outrun the intruder. She was chased down and stabbed 4 times. Michio collapsed on the floor and the intruder ran for the hills. With what little strength Michio had left, she was able to make a phone call to the police. The police arrived and found both Michio and Satomi lying unconscious on the floor. Although they were both rushed to the hospital, Satomi ultimately died from her injuries. She was stabbed over 10 times with a knife. Luckily for her grandmother, she didn't suffer any life-threatening injuries and was able to regain consciousness and make a steady recovery. At the crime scene, the police found an unknown shoe print of blood on the floor. They examined the shoe and were able to identify its brand and model. From Satomi's body, they recovered DNA evidence that confirmed the suspect was a male. During the attack, Satomi's sister and grandmother had a brief encounter with the suspect. They described the man to have short brown hair, slender eyes, pimples, and a large build. In coordination with the police, they gathered details on facial characteristics and were able to get a facial composite based on their testimony. The police believed that this would be an open and shut case. They had fingerprints, DNA, shoe prints, and also a face composite. Satomi's relationships prior to the incident was their key focus during the investigation. They talked to her family, classmates, school officials, but none of them had a testimony that would lead to what happened that night. Initially, it was believed that the murder was committed by an acquaintance of Satomi, who killed her out of rage. But due to the lack of resistance and scratches on Satomi's body, they started investigating the possibility of a stalker. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years went by, and the case went cold with absolutely no progress. There has been tens of thousands of investigators working on the case, and also tens of thousands of suspects questioned, but not a single lead was ever found. The DNA evidence wasn't useful at the time, as the suspect's fingerprints and DNA did not match with anyone in the police database. It's difficult to even think about what Satomi's family is going through during all this time. nearly escaping death and waiting over a decade, yet no one has been convicted. Satomi's father in particular was especially vocal throughout all these years. He worked hard to remind the public of this case by handing out flyers at shopping centers and even starting a blog about his daughter's murder. The family decided to give a reward of 3 million yen, which approximates to 26,000 USD, to anyone who presents information leading to an arrest. This money was meant to be given to Satomi to help with her college fees, which unfortunately no longer can happen. We're fast forwarding all the way to early April in the year 2018. The police received a call from an individual who claimed that his superior at a construction company he worked at had physically assaulted him. The name of his superior was Manabu Kashima, 35 years old, who lives in Ube City, Yamaguchi Prefecture. Employees claimed that in the past, he would beat up his subordinates when he was in a bad mood, and most employees were too afraid to report anything about him. By the time those involved arrived at the police station, they already mellowed down and were ready to leave this incident behind them. However, the police had to collect fingerprints as it was standard procedure whenever a report was made. The police noticed that Kashima in particular looked hesitant to submit his fingerprints, but eventually gave in. Kashima's fingerprints were now in the police database, and feeling that something was strange about Kashima's behavior, the police ran a scan of his fingerprints and a match was triggered. The fingerprints matched the ones collected after the murder of Satomi Kitaguchi, and finally, over a decade, there was a breakthrough in the case. On April 13, 2018, the police arrested Manabu Kashima for the murder of Satomi Kitaguchi. Kashima was charged with sexual assault and murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he ended up pleading guilty to all the charges against him. Kashima was born in Shimonoseki City to a family of 4, moved to Ube City for school, and started a job at a metal processing company in Hagi City. At the time of the incident, he was living alone in a dormitory near where he worked. Kashima was living as a normal Japanese adult man, waking up, going to work, going back home, and repeat. He was always known to be a punctual employee. In the 3.5 years he has worked at a company, he has not been late a single time. The day before the incident, Kashima was scolded by his company for oversleeping and arriving to work late. Kashima went through the day feeling frustrated that the company he worked so diligently for didn't hesitate to talk down and attack him for being late for one day. When he woke up the next morning, he didn't want to go to work. He was frustrated about the events that transpired yesterday, and so he left his home, withdrew about $1,500 in cash, and left Yamaguchi on a moped the next morning after staying at a friend's house. As a game lover himself, he set his destination to Akihabara, Tokyo, a city famous for electronics, maid cafes, and game lovers. On his way to Tokyo, he crossed by Hiroshima, and that is where Kashima's intention to only run away changed. In Hiroshima, Kashima saw Satomi walking home from school and began following her. When Satomi arrived home, she left the front door unlocked, allowing Kashima to follow her inside. He followed her upstairs and found Satomi lying on her bed listening to music. Before Kashima could approach her, she tried to slip past him and run downstairs, but was caught. He began trying to take her clothes off, but was unable to as Satomi fought back as best as she could. Kashima got increasingly agitated and finally snapped. He pulled out his knife and stabbed her multiple times. That is when Satomi's family heard the screams. Kashima was sentenced to life in prison, and the family as well as the community was able to finally feel some relief from the closing of this case. Satomi's father commented that all he felt was happiness that the culprit was finally caught, and he wished for more unsolved cases in Hiroshima to be solved. Satomi's sister expressed the amount of pressure she felt being the only person who saw the criminal on that day, and the guilt she would feel if she ever forgot what she saw. She was able to endure all these years and is just glad that she was not caught on that day as well. All in all, I'm glad that Satomi's family will now be able to feel the closure that they needed and be able to grieve properly. And so, that concludes the case of Satomi Kitaguchi. I know this story was relatively short, but as there was not much information out there, it was difficult to get all the details of this case. I hope you enjoyed the video nonetheless, and I want to thank you for making it to the end of this video. If you have a specific story you want me to cover, please leave it in the comments below. I read every single comment left on my videos. I'm going to be uploading more frequently moving forward. So if you want to come along for the ride, please consider subscribing and I'll see you in the next video.